Hello and welcome to China Dispatches, a European Chamber podcast that shares on-the-ground insights from European business leaders and experts on doing business in China. I'm your host, Carl Hayward. The European Chamber's annual flagship report, the European Business in China Position Paper, was released on the 17th of September. As 2025 is the last year of China's 14th five-year plan, this year's executive position paper reviews the plan's outcomes and provides constructive recommendations for the upcoming 15th five-year plan based on feedback from our member companies. I'm joined today by European Chamber President Jens Eskelund and European Chamber Vice President Stefan Bernhart to discuss the past 5 years from the perspective of European business in China and to look forward and highlight some of the areas that European companies hope will characterise China's economic development over the next half-decade. So my first question, of the many impactful global events of the past 5 years, which one do you think has had the greatest influence on China and EU-China relations? Jens.
Where to begin? I think the past 5 years have been tumultuous and volatile to a level that we haven't really seen before, at least not as long as I have been around to witness events. Going back 5 years, that's 2020. Right at the outset of the year, I think 5th or 6th January, we had the outbreak of COVID.
Yeah.
I remember I was in Hainan, and while I was there, the airport closed. And we were stuck there for 3 months. Not the worst place to get stuck 3 months during winter, but
True.
we had COVID in 2020. Then we had the real estate crash in 2021. We had Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. We had the Red Sea crisis last year, and then we had, of course, Liberation Day tariffs coming now. So, we used to talk about black swan events as events that happened sort of once every decade or once every 2 decades, but they seem to be happening now every year. So I think if you're looking back 5 years, there's plenty to talk about.
True. Stefan, maybe you could pitch in then. Which one of those developments do you think has maybe had the biggest influence on EU-China relations?
Well, I think Jens already mentioned that the Ukraine war certainly on a political level had a huge impact on EU-China relations. From an economic point of view, China's economic development after the end of the zero COVID restrictions, in particular this confidence crisis for consumers, the resulting growth of exports to the EU and to the world, that had a major impact on relations as well to date.
Yeah, and seems like it will do for some time to come until they can find a resolution. So over this period, the past 5 years, looking back, we've been looking at the 14th five-year plan as China's blueprint for development. Arguably, it's been successful. But what are some of the focal points of the plan? Which of those do you think led to positive developments? But also, which of those do you think maybe led to not so positive outcomes? Jens.
Yeah. I think it depends entirely on your perspective. And if I were to sort of take the perspective of the Chinese government, I actually think that they feel that they have been vindicated in terms of having had this high focus on security, on self-reliance, formalizing sort of the dual circulation concept. I mean, with the amount of volatility and black swan events in the economy, it seems to have been sort of a reasonable call to double down on self-reliance. The flip side, of course, is that, this massive investment in industrial policy and in manufacturing as real estate faltered is what really sort of laid the foundation for some of the issues we have today in terms of involution and sometimes also the wasteful use of resources invested in manufacturing capacity, for which very often we simply don't see much of a purpose. So I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think overall the government probably feels that, they called it out right when they decided on these priorities.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that there is a sort of a retroactive justification for the way that there's been a convergence between development and security. But at the same time, I mean, the Chamber's asking now to sort of take a more reform-based approach in order to get through the next half decade and beyond. Is there not a feeling that, from the government side, like you say, they look back and think they've done well and that they will just simply double down on the kind of policy direction that the last 5 years have taken?
That is perhaps where we are a little bit in doubt on where things are going, because I think that we are sort of seeing an announcement that goes both ways. During the president's tour of Hunan in the middle of May, we heard an announcement that sort of self-reliance is the bedrock of Chinese development and that manufacturing must remain sort of a high proportion of the economy. And these things would indicate that going forward, we'll see more of the same. But then again, in July, we also heard both from the president and the premier talk about how there has been overinvestment in some sectors and that irrational competition needs to be addressed. And that's why we think it's so important that in the 15th five-year plan that you get that exactly right, that you recognize that there's been overinvestment, that you recognize that some of the overinvestment leads to these very deep issues that are being felt by Chinese companies and foreign companies alike right now. And that's what we try to do with our contribution, that is to sort of emphasize the importance of getting this right.
And I guess a lot of it will come down to the local five-year plans and also the sectoral five-year plans as well. So we need to keep an eye on that. Stefan, what opportunities do you think the 14th five-year plan brought to European businesses?
One of the consequences of China's drive for technological self-reliance and also like to boost science and technology, to boost basically high quality development, also led in many industries, also in the auto industry as an example, to like an incredible ecosystem and one of, I would say, like the most innovative ecosystems in the world. And I think that is true for the auto industry, but also for other sectors. Yeah. And I think that offered an incredible opportunity also for foreign companies and European companies to tap into that potential and to benefit from cooperation with local players and to also improve the own technology and innovation capabilities.
Mm. When we talk about some of the less desirable outcomes of the 14th five-year plan, as you've already mentioned, Jens, involution, the higher level of focus on security, which has led to quite unreasonable in some sector localization requirements and on foreign companies. What actual impact has this had, do you think, on European businesses that are operating here?
One thing we see very clearly is that margins are declining, and we had in our latest business confidence survey 70% of our members telling us that they have equal or larger margins outside China than inside China. We see sort of decreasing capacity utilization, growing inventories, and the pressure to find other ways to offload some of these products that were originally intended for the Chinese market. If you are and are sitting with this inventory, companies are beginning to explore to a higher degree whether some of these goods can get exported. What worries us a little bit, and what we see as a clear downside risk, is also that this sort of pressure to export and China's growing share of global export is leading to an increase in trade tension. And I think we obviously saw very, very clearly with the United States, where we have a full-blown trade war, and we could be concerned that as China's share of global export continue to increase, that we'll see some similar dynamics play out with other trading partners. And that, frankly, is in no one's interest. So there is a bit of urgency in terms of addressing sort of these imbalances and ensuring that the domestic market becomes better at absorbing some of that manufacturing taking place here.
Anything to add to that, Stefan?
Again, I think the auto industry serves as a good example of the development here in the country. I mean, when you look back at 2021, the number of new energy vehicles on the road or newly cars sold was about 3 million and a market share of 15%. Today in 2025, we expect those numbers to go up to like 12 or 13 million and the market share of more than half of the total market. So that's an incredible development.
It is.
And as I mentioned before, also in like one of the results of this incredible ecosystem that we have for electric mobility. But then the downside of it is that we have also involution and a very tough price war in the industry, structural overcapacity, and like that weighs on the profitability of both domestic players and also foreign car companies. And I think Chinese car companies, they seek now to like export more because they know that in other markets of the world the profitability is better. They can sell cars there more easily. I think that exemplifies like the positive developments and some of the negative impact that we have seen by those developments.
I mean, the chamber doesn't have a specific position on this, but I mean, when you look at what the causes of involution, particularly in the automotive industry, it sort of begs that there needs to be a sort of industry consolidation at some point. And Jens talked in his presentation of the position paper today of the local government prisoner's dilemma, whereby you're not going to get one local government will decide to give up their auto brand for the greater good of the country when his neighbor in the next province will continue. So I'm just wondering, do you see, is there a timeline? Do you believe that there will be some kind of forced consolidation that will happen in the automotive market in the coming years?
Well, it's a huge challenge because the local government, as you rightly said, I mean, first of all, they followed the strategic guidance to invest in strategic industries like NEVs. And now, I mean, they supported their local players. And in return, they expect those companies to provide jobs, to pay taxes, and they rely on that also for the economic growth in their provinces. So that will not go away, and that's why I don't think we will see a resolution of that problem anytime soon. The central government, I mean, they have taken a number of actions now, also with anti-unfair competition regulation and to set the payment terms in a much shorter intervals. But all in all, I mean, that dilemma for the local governments, I mean, is very difficult to resolve. And that's why I think they will have a hard time to let their local heroes go.
So according to the Business Confidence Survey 2025, the percentage of respondents reporting that business became more difficult increased every year from 2021 to 2025 from 47% to 73%. By the second half of the 14th five-year plan period, China's FDI also steadily dropped, and basically China's allure as an investment destination began to fade. So when we're looking forward, the 15th five-year plan is poised to set the direction for social and economic development for the next half a decade. Jens, what do you think are the most important challenges that need to be addressed?
I think it's interesting this year that my feeling is that the majority of issues we are having are actually the same as domestic Chinese companies are having. So I see a clear convergence between our issues and the issues of domestic Chinese companies. And that, of course, gives us a little bit confidence that maybe we have higher chances of success in terms of conveying some of these messages, because it really are sort of universal issues.
So we're showing empathy instead of just complaining.
You can say so. But also because I think it has real implications for the economy when companies are not making money, when they are engaging in cost cutting, laying off people. So something will need to change sort of for the greater good of the Chinese economy. It is a fairly dramatic increase that we have seen in the number of companies that find it's getting more difficult to do business here. But I actually think that a major driver of that increase is exactly the state of the domestic Chinese economy. Yeah. And that sort of adds to the urgency of beginning to deal with this involution and overcapacity situation, because it is only when you sort of get out of this deflationary spiral we're in right now and companies begin to see that they return to profitability. I was actually surprised to see that it's a full 22%, according to NBS and Bloomberg, around 22% of companies in China that were loss-giving. I actually think on average, European companies are doing slightly better, but it's a very high proportion. So something needs to happen. So again, companies are having reasonable returns that allow them to continue invest in also developing their businesses and employment. Key to that would be show willingness to act in terms of creating demand. But as long as you have manufacturing output, the supply side actually growing faster than the demand side, then we're not going to get out of this deflationary cycle. As we saw in the first half, retail sales was up 4.6%, very good, very solid growth, but manufacturing output was up by 6.1%, So until that point in time where you establish a balance, we think it'll be very, very difficult for China to get out of the deflationary cycle. So focus in equal measure on the supply side to the extent as you do on the demand side.
I mean, from a Chamber's point of view, I think for the 15th five-year plan, what we would like to see is just a clean slate, right? And everything to be completely reform focused, but that's probably somewhat unrealistic. So Stefan, what core principles from the 14th five-year plan do you think we can expect to see carried over into the 15th five-year plan?
I think some of the structural issues are not going away. And I think one challenge that Jens just described is the Chinese government has to find a way to change the growth model of the country. And now that infrastructure investments and real estate investments don't work anymore as the engines of economic growth, they need to find a new path of sustainable growth for the country. And we have seen those issues with the growth in manufacturing and the growth of export. I think for the time being, the Chinese government is happy with that. But there will be more issues along the way that we feel as foreign companies, and also that we feel at home in Europe, some of the negative consequences of that. So I think that will be some element that the Chinese government will need to tackle with a new plan. Jens mentioned already rightly the focus on more demand to balance that. But I think what we will see also is that China will continue this drive for technological development, this upgrade of the economy, and also technological self-reliance, because I believe that what China feels is that pressure coming from the United States will probably also not going away, and that competition with the US will continue. So that will certainly be one of the elements that China will continue to pursue.
We've produced at the European Chamber 25 editions of our annual position paper since 2000. The first one contained just 110 recommendations, and the total this year, we've passed 1,000, I think it's 1,141. Obviously, we can't go through all of them now. So, Jens, could you give us what are our top 5 recommendations this year? What do our members want to see included in the 15th five-year plan?
Yeah, top 5. I think, again, as we have talked about, that the state of the domestic economy is top of mind of most of our members. So, tackling involution would be at the very top.
Yeah.
I think another one is that we see right now that there's a lot of competition for resources in China right now. And frankly, what we see very often is that a lot of capital is being deployed in China in ways that are not productive or does not add positively to the economy. We have been talking a lot about manufacturing, bridges to nowhere in some cases. I mean, China still has significant need for additional infrastructure, but it's important that it's being invested in places where you actually get a return. And again, manufacturing, there needs to be a market for the kind of manufacturing that you're actually investing in. We think that given that the main issue now is a reluctance amongst Chinese family to spend. I mean, Chinese families have historically high savings rate, but are also historically reluctant to spend. Maybe you can divert some of that investment, for which there is no purpose, into investment in sort of addressing some of the anxieties that Chinese families have. So that's the second one, sort of avoid wasteful deployment of resources, or as the president would have put it at the third plenary in 2013, let the market allocate resources. The third one is to make sure that China's trade partners also see a benefit of the trading relationship with China. And that's where we think, many of Chinese trading partners, as we are seeing in many instances, that trade is becoming more of a one-way street, that, countries are asking themselves, hang on a minute, does this make sense? I mean, we all like a free trade, but again, if the benefits of trade are being allocated in a manner that does not benefit both sides, I think that there are reasons to actually question whether some changes need to take place. Then one area where there's good news, I think the green agenda and Chinese green tech, we actually agree with the Chinese government that this is a global public good. We think the energy transition, decarbonization on a global scale would not be possible, or at least not with a similar speed, without having access to Chinese green tech. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be done to sort of also enhance the efficiency of how this is done, but this is an area where we actually support China doubling down in many areas. And the last one is, reform and opening up, in particular in more complex, sophisticated areas such as ICT, where in spite of these sort of commitments made to reform and opening up, we actually see when it comes to highly complex products, in particular ICT, whether it's hardware or software, that in some areas it's actually becoming more restrictive. Maybe there, or our advice is, be very, very careful in terms of the sort of restrictions you put in place. We have great European companies who are willing and able to contribute to development in China if they are permitted to do so. So those would be the top 5.
One of the things we've been doing in the past couple of months is just sort of reflecting over 25 years, because it's the Chamber's 25th birthday this year. And the kind of work that the European Chamber does, I don't think has really changed that much in essence. It's just that as China's economy has grown, the environment has just become more complex. And therefore the number of challenges we're dealing with and perhaps the intensity of challenges has increased as well. So we're having to do more of the same these days. And the fact that China's rise has obviously led it to become a genuine challenge to the US means that maybe the situation we're in today was always going to be somewhat inevitable. But from a business perspective, of course, you've got to survive that. And they often find themselves caught between a rock and a hard place. So whether it is, politicization of business, you have maybe companies that are based here that aren't allowed to use US components, or they have US customers rather, who are asking for goods that have no Chinese components. They're having a far harder time to survive and thrive today. So a question for both of you. What recommendations would you give to European companies that are caught in the crossfire of global trade frictions due to tariffs, sanctions, or other measures such as export controls and public procurement restrictions? Maybe we'll start with you, Stefan.
I think, it's true. The complexity of the business is much higher than it used to be, and there are so many challenges that companies are faced with. But I think that most companies in China, they already, have a very clear eye on what's happening, and especially those that have been here for longer, and they have adapted their strategies how to respond to that. And I think most companies and also our members, they diversify and they de-risk, and there are different approaches how to do that. I think there are many companies that adopted an in China for China approach to localize their supply chains further, to basically also move R&D to the country, to be closer to the customer, to respond to the regulatory environment here. And I think that is one example for how you can at least shield to a certain extent also from tariffs or export controls or other measures coming from the outside, to at least protect your business within China. And then I guess you have to probably adopt then the same approach in Europe and probably for other markets in the world as well. So I think that is just one example of many, but I think most of our members, they have a very clear answer how to diversify and how to de-risk their business.
Jens, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's what we clearly see. We see, I think, around 3/4 of our members who have actually done a review of sort of their supply chains and invested in building resilience and robustness in their supply chains. And I think this is one of the concrete outcomes of living in such volatile times with all this incessant procession of one black swan event of the other, right? There is a premium now on supply chain resilience, on adaptability, on being agile. And I think in many ways that European companies are better equipped to meet come what may today than they were 5 years ago, because we have been through so many things, the good and the bad and the really ugly, right? That we are aware now that we need to be prepared. And I think our organizations are prepared. That being said, of course, there might be situations where simply we will have to make the decision that this is getting too complex, this is getting too costly. We will simply need to exit. But I think this is by no means universal. It depends very much what industry you're in and what China means to you and yourself.
So in other words, we may have entered an era of where security and resilience becomes a global imperative. It's no longer just the focus of China. Companies as well are going to have to adapt in the same way.
I think so indeed that's a global phenomenon, and that's what we hear from our members also. I mean, one of the lessons of COVID was that you need to have a plan B, a plan C, plan D. You simply cannot be too dependent on a single source, a single origin of critically important parts or components. We know that, events that we simply, unknowns might happen in ways that we simply could not imagine. So therefore, be ready, be prepared, invest in resilience, making sure that come what may, that you are ready to withstand.
Jens, Stefan, thanks very much for joining us on China Dispatches.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
If you like our podcast, please subscribe to China Dispatches, recommend it to your colleagues and friends, and share it on social media. Also, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can find contact details in the show notes. This is Carl Hayward from China Dispatches. Thanks for listening.